after the gubernatorial elections are back, and this governor, if reelected, never has to face the electorate again. So, that's the problem I have. We need to get serious. And all of these situations that we're involved in pale in comparison. We talked about the actuarially required contribution to meet our budget requirements. We changed the law. Who started talking about these pensions? The Senate started talking about these pensions and our failure to meet our actuarially required contributions. And we gave relief to local governments by allowing them to phase in their contributions on their insurance payments. And this year we passed through the Senate a proposal that would give them $100 million worth of relief over the next 10 years, because that affects school systems too, because their school bus drivers and cooks and all their classified employees and uncertified employees are there, and the school systems are in that situation too. So we have a bad problem, but if we don't take care of the pension system and the structural imbalance in our budget, there won't be any money to send to the Floyd County school system. All the money will be consumed by pension payments that are actuarially required, increasing health insurance payments, and trying to plug the hole in these structural deficits, because we're not willing to step up to the plate and make the cuts that are necessary and operate our state government the way every business operates.
Under the recommendations by the Chamber on the public employee pension, just very quickly, reducing health insurance costs, suspending COLA, adopting a defined contribution plan, emphasizing total compensation on page 11. Which one of those do you agree with, disagree with, or would you change in some way that would make it more palatable to you in the legislature? Either one. Senator Williams?
Well, that's on page 11 in the red print.
Yes,
yeah.
Right.
I feel like I'm at the First Methodist Church in Frankfurt. We always have there the responsive readings. We could all turn to page 11 and do this sort of thing. So in any event, I want to commend the Speaker and the folks in the House for trying to change the public employee health insurance plan from a co-payment to co-insurance. It took some heavy lifting to get that done. It was a major change in public policy. It affects utilization so that people value the health insurance that they have. We're self-insured, and we set what the premiums are, but we have a set amount of money that we budget off of as a self-insured entity. So the governor line item vetoed that. The only way that we're going to reduce health insurance costs in the state of Kentucky it is to go along those lines. And the reason that it affects the pension plan is the pension plan health insurance benefits are measured by what the active employee has. The health care insurance plans are not included in the inviolable contract. So when you adjust the health insurance benefits for the active employee, it adjusts it for the retiree. This is not true for teachers' retirement, which was addressed earlier. That's an important step there, and we must do it. Now, the governor has asked for some of the money we're going to get back from the federal government. There is some federal government money coming back to help us compensate for health insurance costs. That money, it allegedly is going to be used to buy down the cost of our health insurance policies next year. And that will be another example of using one-time money to exacerbate a problem. And when you buy down the cost of that, it costs the health insurance of the pensions to go up, because you're not buying those down too. So I think we'll have to reduce the health insurance cost. The COLA suspension situation, the law is right now that all public employees receive a 1.5% COLA every year unless the General Assembly suspends it. Now, you might suggest that it should be the opposite, that there should not be an automatic COLA unless one is enacted every year. The General Assembly suspends every year the automatic 5% pay increase that is in the statute, and every governor recommends that, and every General Assembly does that. I think that it is inappropriate to have a mandated increase in anything in the statute, to have anything operating on an automatic pilot. Adopt a defined contribution plan. Over 3.5 years ago, we tried to get state government to adopt what we called a hybrid plan, half defined contribution, half defined benefit. In the last session of General Assembly, for new employees, we went with an entire defined contribution plan for new employees. We have to do that. If you're in a hole, you have to quit digging deeper. Now, I noticed in this report, the word hybrid plan, if some of you used that, was used to mean go to a defined contribution plan and get some of the savings that you do to buy bonds, pension bonds, to reduce the unfunded liability. That would give some immediate relief if the bonds if the money you put in the pension plan performed well. You could do bonds and put money in the pension plan. If it performs well, you've saved a problem. If you do bonds and you put it in the pension plan and the stock market goes down, you've got two problems. Number one, you've got to pay off the bonds and you've lost the money. Therein lies the problem with the defined benefit plan, the risk. So I do believe we have to go to a defined contribution plan and emphasizing total compensation. It will take a sea change to convince state employees that they are not entitled to health insurance and that they shouldn't be considered, any cost of increase in health insurance should be considered as part of their compensation package. They don't look at it like that. That's the culture of state government. And I do think that the total compensation package ought to be presented to all new employees and ought to be presented to state employees. Because if you look at the total compensation package, that's really why people stay at work or leave or go to another job. But I will submit to you that the biggest thing that we have in all of this sort of situation is the defined contribution plan.
Mr. Speaker, could you comment on those suggestions?
Until Governor Patton took office, the General Assembly had always made the contribution that the retirement systems recommended. I believe that's correct. Under the law, before the governor or the General Assembly can not make that contribution, like any employer, we have to get an actuarial study, which was done. And so that all of these, when you hear people say that you didn't put enough money into the system, that's not exactly correct. We didn't put the amount that their actuary may have said was required, but we did have an actuary, as the governor did, and I believe we funded them all at the level that the governor recommended in his budgets all through those years. Now, here's what happened. Here's what really happened, and I want to again commend Crit Llewellyn for looking at that retirement system. When I was Attorney General, I wanted to go look and see. But remember, that was when all the litigation was going on by other states about these companies, these scams, these Wall Street people. Enron was a good example. And some states were joining these large multi-state recovery actions. But they're predicated upon the size of your pension fund as it relates to the entire bundle. Well, really, ours is big to us, but it's small when you put us in there with Illinois and California and New York and others. So what occurred was that states started looking at becoming what we call first plaintiff, the lead counsel, or using state law to try to recover some of these monies from these brokers. Alabama was very good at recovering more money from Enron, about 4 or 5 times more than we got back, because they did exactly that. So I went to the funds and said, look, you know, I don't know anything about this as Attorney General, but I've got funds or law firms who have come to me who will look at your situation for free and simply give you advice as to whether or not you should maybe pursue a different course. I thought that was prudent. You know what happened? They wouldn't let me in. The Attorney General of the state of Kentucky couldn't get in to see those records. Now, that tipped me off that something was wrong. Something's wrong in the way that the governance of those funds occurs. The Attorney General probably ought to be a member of all of those funds, and it's an oversight function. There ought to be independent audits every year. How can we continue to give money to people and then lose control over it but guarantee what the payment's going to be at the end? That's really what happens. And so I agree that there's got to be some fundamental changes. And for new employees, I don't think there's any question. The retirement system's going to change in Kentucky. We've got pretty settled law in this state that the inviolable contract is going to have to be followed through, so we're going to have to pay the commitments that we have. But as far as the governance, the oversight, this entire thing that we're debating now about that you hear debated is a debate that should have occurred probably 20 years ago. But the fact of the matter is, some of our retirement systems are in pretty good shape. You know, the judicial retirement system, which includes ours, is in pretty good shape because they manage their money a little bit better than some of the other systems did. Had those systems managed their money and met the expectations in the market, we wouldn't have this problem. But we do have it because that didn't occur. Now, that wasn't all their fault. We all know that there was a downturn in the economy. But the fact of the matter is, it needs to be looked at. The taxpayers of Kentucky can't continue to be required to pay a bill that they lose control over as to how these monies are invested and how they spend their money and all these middlemen that they pay their money to. I mean, it's crazy. It just doesn't make any sense. And so I agree that is something, Mr. President, that we need to look at and focus on. And now we've got the benefit of the auditor's report and others, which verifies what some of us have been thinking for a long time.
Mr. Speaker, where do you think the consensus is in the House on adopting a defined benefit plan and contribution plan, and why that has not?
We took the first steps in doing that back in I guess with Chairman Cherry's bill, Mr. President, back in 2009, and changed the benefit structure for new hires. And you can't change it for the people who are vested. That's the law. But what you can do is change it for people who come into the system. I think it's only fair that government live up to its promise. Whether it was a bad promise or not, when government makes you a promise, it ought to live up to it. But that's a whole different set of circumstances when you talk about new hires who are coming into the system, who are told up front what the rules are, and then they can decide whether or not they want to work for this employer or for some other employer.
Well, where's that?
I would argue that it's it's a fair debate, and I don't think you're going to find the House just automatically turning its back on the issue of new hires.
But there has been a pushback on that.
There has been, because a lot of people don't understand some of this, and it is a very complicated issue. But I said this here last year, by the way, and word got out, and somebody accused me of changing my political affiliation. I don't know. I mean, all I said was what I thought was correct. But the fact is, we have got to change that to protect the promises that government made to its existing people within that system. And that should be our first concern. And so we've got to live up to the promises that were made, and we've got to protect those people who are entitled to those benefits. That was a promise that we should fulfill. But to do that, I think we're going to have to we can't continue making those promises in that same manner. I think that's probably the better way to say it, Bill.
Yeah, that's, I appreciate the Speaker's courage in making that sort of statement. And I will tell you something. When you hear states talking of going to the federal government to seek permission for a state to declare bankruptcy, what they're talking about are their legacy costs of their pensions. There's nothing else. They're not going to bankrupt the bonds that they have for infrastructure or anything. They're talking about that. So everyone within the sound of my voice, or anyone you can tell, needs to understand that the people that want to protect the obligations that the state has made previously to our employees and our retirees are the ones that should be talking about changing the system so it's sustainable. But even the larger issue is, what obligation do we have to the taxpayers? Is it fair for taxpayers who have to take care of their own retirement in difficult circumstances, who've seen the value of their portfolios to go down and who've had to ride the investment risk that they've made, not only have to secure their own retirement and make changes to work longer, but have to secure the retirement of everybody that works in state government now or that might be hired in the future? Now, that's a matter of philosophical difference. And there's only one person in this state that I've heard say that there's no need to change our retirement system. And he's not sitting in this chair here today. And until you have a governor of the Commonwealth of Kentucky, in my opinion, who's willing to help lead on that issue, then the change won't be made. I don't think the legislature will make that change. And I do think, Mr. Speaker, that you're right about the inviolable contract. But I do think that there might be people that are in the first 5 years of their service in state government that have not vested yet that might want to be bought out of the present retirement defined benefit plan and go over into defined contribution plan to get the portability. And we've been chewing this around for 3.5 to 4 years, and during that time period, 6,500 or 7,000 more people have come under the inviolable contract. And that's at state level, local level too. So we have to make this decision at the moment. It's crucial that we make that decision. And then there is the talk about how much more it costs to do both of these systems. And I will submit that we need to get the best and brightest people to understand that the accounting rules that the actuaries use require you to change your assumptions on that predicate your unfunded liability if you stop enrolling people in the new system. They say that you can't make basic assumptions, that the assumptions have to change. I want, if I can, Bill, just talk about the assumptions and why this should be a scarier issue than people really realize it is. The assumptions that our unfunded liability calculated on is a 7.75% return on our investment portfolio compounded year after year after year, and a 4.5% increase in payroll year after year after year. Now, I don't know how many of you would like to bet the ranch on whether or not you can perform at 7.75% per year. But if you thought you could, if you have one downturn and your corpus or your base gets lower, it's hard to make that up even if you perform well in the out years. And that is the basic reason that we cannot have a defined benefit plan for the government to be responsible for everybody's retirement, with the exception of teachers who don't have Social Security and use it for a pension, and they're settling their problem over there. That's the problem that we have. It's a huge problem. And if we had funded, Mr. Speaker, you're right, we did fund what every governor had asked for. If we'd funded what every actuary had told us, we'd still be in the hole right now, because no actuary could have anticipated a 30% drop in the stock market. If they could have, you know, they wouldn't be telling us about it. They'd be getting zillions of dollars themselves. So once that dip happens, what an actuary told you what might happen predicated on these assumptions or what was going to happen is irrelevant, because you got to make that up anyway. And therein lies the major problem with a defined benefit plan and the government and the taxpayers assuming the responsibility for all state employees.
Gentlemen, I'd like to suggest that we cover a couple of other areas and then open it up for questions or comments, hopefully questions from some of the members of the audience. But the first thing I want you to do, if you would, is turn in your hymnal to page 6. Give us an update on House Bill 463, which addressed the corrections problem that we faced in Kentucky. This was an initiative of the Chamber's several years ago in the leaky bucket, and you've both worked tirelessly. Senator Williams, I think you and I attended almost a day-long meeting more than once, certainly one at the University of Kentucky looking at the Pew report and a number of other areas. Tell us, bring us up to date on where we are there and how successful you think that new bill will go toward saving the state some money.
Well, the Pew Foundation came into Kentucky primarily because of legislative initiative. The House and the Senate agreed to spend $200,000, a mere $200,000, to give to the Pew Foundation to help fund their attendance here. At the time, I was chairman of the Council of State Governments, and one of the initiatives we had around the country was working with the Pew Foundation to go into various states. They'd gone into Texas and other states and had some success. They were out of money, and they had gone to as many states as they wanted to. So the chairman of the Senate Judiciary Committee and the House Judiciary Committee went with me and with some other folks and met with the Pew Foundation in New York and told them that we would help fund, and the Speaker was supportive, and we got them to come in, and I think that you'll agree, Speaker, they did a tremendous job in formulating public sentiment and managing the press about this. Now, in some circles, this is not a popular move, but to do something like this, you have to have strong bipartisan support and take a chance that you're going to be able to make it through the process. This bill passed the Kentucky State Senate 38-0. And I don't think were there any votes against it in the House?
I don't think so.
This is a monumental accomplishment. Now, what we have to do now is to go forward to make sure that this works and to monitor it and to understand that when you get involved in drug rehabilitation and the illness of drug addiction, that we don't have enough treatment beds available in our state. So this was a great moment for the General Assembly. And we've got to make sure that if there are any gaps or holes in it and if there are any danger to the public, that we're on top of it. And I think the General Assembly is willing to do that. But again, earlier today I heard some talk about where we're going to spend this money that we're going to save. That's like going to a sale. The speaker would go to Brooks Brothers, but I would go to Joseph A. Banks. You know, and going to a sale there and buy one suit and get 2 suits free and wonder where you're going to spend the other money for the 2 free suits that you got. You know, what we're going to have to make sure is that we invest the money necessary to do the treatment, but we're not going to have any money saved, but we might have some lives saved and some changes made. And I think it was a good moment that the General Assembly had.
The actual Pew Study wanted that money, recommended that money be plowed back into the system. And because you get a benefit from that. If we stop addictions and addictive behaviors, then obviously that has an impact down the road. So it's a lot of people say it's spending smart on crime instead of, people want to say, well, you're being soft on crime. No, we're being smart on crime. So those savings were essentially plowed back in. They're not monies that we can transfer necessarily to other parts of state government, but I think they're good investments. I agree with the President. That was a pretty good study, and Senator Jensen and Representative Tilley ought to be commended. They really did a yeoman's job with a very complicated issue.
Now, the judiciary participated. The Chief Justice, I think Chief Justice Minton came forward, Commonwealth attorneys, other folks came forward, and now we've got to make sure that we're all invested in this, that we monitor it very carefully, and that if there are any glitches in it as far as public safety, we immediately address those.
Earlier in the afternoon, actually before lunch this morning, I asked a panel, John David Ike Alcross and Vanessa Gallman, to speak to the new agenda for Kentucky campaign. Those are the 5 new initiatives unveiled by the Chamber, and I have those here. And I asked them, I'm going to ask you the same question if I could, and I'll pass that. That's you didn't get that printout.
You're speaking out of a different hymnal then.
Those are education, globalization, energy, government modernization, and health and wellness. Education, globalization, government modernization, energy, and health and wellness. And that's what really the day-and-a-half forum here has been centered around, addressing all of those different areas. If you were asked, as I'm going to do, to choose one of those initiatives, and I'll pass this over to you right now. If you were to look at one of those initiatives over all of the others, continuing your work in a certain area of education, whatever it happened to be, what would those be, and how would you see success in the General Assembly in making an effort to make improvements, to do a better job in these areas?
Well, is this a multiple choice? Is it all of the above? Or what?
No, you can't say all of the above. You have to choose one.
Well, obviously, I would choose none of the 3 of these things. Energy is crucially important. We're having an affront, an assault being made upon the coal industry and our cheap electricity bills. Health and wellness is a matter of public education and personal responsibility. It's very important. Government modernization should be a foregone conclusion that we have to do that sort of thing. Globalization, as far as our exports, very, very important. That has to do with our workforce and our ability to produce. And education, obviously the Speaker and I have been very involved in education for a long time. I was one of the few Republicans, probably the only remaining Republican that voted for the Kentucky Education Reform Act, and I've done the last 10 years, I've been trying to change crucial portions of that which were wrong, like the CATS test and not having the sort of curriculum that we needed. But the bottom line is, if we don't have an environment in the state of Kentucky where we can create jobs and maintain jobs, we're not going to be able to pay for the rest of these things. And we have to have an immediate action about that. We need to change the culture of government. The administrative regulations that are in place need to immediately be ripped out and everyone reenacted, predicated on which might make Kentucky a better place to retain jobs. The tax structure must be immediately changed to make it the best place in the state to do jobs. And we have to take a broader look at our labor environment in this state. The right to work law and prevailing wage laws that are so politically charged in this state have to be examined very closely. And I will tell you that there are thousands of jobs that will never come to Kentucky if we don't take a look at the premise that anyone that wants to join a union should be able to join a union, and that no one that doesn't want to join a union should be forced to join a union. And until we do that, we're going to be out of luck as far as job creations. And if we have the percentage of our population unemployed or underemployed, double-digit unemployment, and 16% of our people, if you look at totally, they're part-time employed or not making a living wage, then we're not going to be able to worry about these other things. There won't be any workers here to get us globalized. We won't have any money for education. We'll be in such a turmoil in state government that we'll just be cutting budgets all the time and won't be able to do things. Our health and wellness will fall apart because people won't have enough money to take care of themselves and have the prosperity that leads to good health. So that's the basic thing that we as Kentuckians have to look at. It's going to be a tough battle in a state that is an island to itself with all the other states surrounding us not doing that. So that's my answer. You want the list?
You've seen the list, haven't you, Mr. Stumbo?
No.
We didn't share that with you. I thought we kept that away from Senator Williams just on purpose.
No. Given my voting record, I don't get all your publications, believe me. Actually, I started this debate because, and I chose to, by issuing what I thought was a challenge. But it was a challenge accompanied by a peace offering. I think it's time that we as the state, if we really want to get ahead of this game, then we have to think outside the box. We've got industrial sites all over this state that the fiscal courts don't want to spend the money to mow the grass on right now because times are tough. We've failed in our efforts, really, to create jobs all over Kentucky. We've done a wonderful job of creating jobs in certain areas of Kentucky, and we're sitting in one of them, this Golden Triangle. So what does that tell us? It tells me that we've got to start thinking differently. And I think to do that, what we've got to do is to do things that other states aren't doing. We're a poor, relatively rural state. Al Cross used to make that argument all the time, and he's correct. We have got to do something different, whether it's in education or transportation or reforming government, whatever it is, Bill. I think we have to do something different. I agree with the President on that. We take a bit of a different approach, perhaps. I think that what we ought to do is engage in a real conversation about where we want to spend our money, and then let's figure out how we're going to get it. Because that's what worked in 1989 with the Education Reform Act that both the President and I supported. And we said, we're going to take your money, Mr. Taxpayer, but we're going to improve the education system in your state. We're going to provide an equal opportunity for every child, no matter where they live in this state. That's what that child's constitutional right is. It's what the court told us. And you know what happened after that was that the people across Kentucky agreed that that was something worth paying more taxes for. And so they didn't kick us all out en masse. They let a few of us continue to serve in government. That's a big statement, I think. And I believe that that's what we ought to go back and do again, that we ought to set our goals and our priorities, business community, government leaders, and say, here's where we want to be. Here's where we want to spend our money. We want to have full-time kindergarten. We want to have a corporate income tax. Or we don't want to have any corporate income tax. We want to have some sort of a federal, for people in poverty, an income tax credit for people in poverty, federal tax credit for people in poverty. That's where we want to go to. But to get there, we have to have a different tax structure.